Today, we're going to dig into one of history's great what-ifs, the Crusade of Varna. It's a story about how a single, fatally broken promise didn't just lose a battle. It actually helped change the entire map of the world forever. And it all comes down to this single moment of absolute chaos. We're looking at November 10th, 1444. A massive European crusader army, led by the King of Poland and Hungary, is being completely, utterly annihilated by the Ottoman Empire. This wasn't just a loss, it was a total catastrophe. But here's what makes this story so wild. How did it come to this? I mean, just months before this slaughter, these two sides had signed and sworn on a 10-year peace treaty. Yeah, a peace treaty. To figure out what went so disastrously wrong, we gotta go back. Okay, so to really get the weight of that broken promise, you first have to understand the scale of the disaster it caused. So yeah, let's start at the end with what happened right after the battle. I mean, the results here, they really speak for themselves. A decisive, crushing Ottoman victory. Over 15,000 crusaders lost. But the real shocker is in that leaders lost column. You have Cardinal Julian Cesarini, the Pope's own guy, killed. And then there's the king himself, Władysław III, listed simply as missing in action. And this is such a crucial detail. The leader of the entire crusade, a king of two massive kingdoms, just vanishes. Poof. His body was never found, which you can imagine fueled all sorts of rumors for years and threw his kingdoms into absolute chaos. The crusade wasn't just defeated, it was literally decapitated. A vanished king, a shattered army, a complete and total disaster. But, it didn't start out this way. Not at all. Let's rewind a bit and see how this whole thing began with so much promise that, honestly, many people thought it was simply unstoppable. So, on paper, this was like a 15th century dream team. Seriously, you had the young, super ambitious King Władysław III leading the charge. Your general? Oh, just John Hunyadi, a celebrated military genius who was already famous for beating Ottoman armies. And the whole thing had the full backing of the Pope himself, Pope Eugene IV, who called for this crusade to stop the Ottomans from pushing further into Europe. And their initial power was just undeniable. In their first big campaign back in late 1443, they just rolled across the Danube and pushed deep, and I mean deep, into Ottoman territory. This wasn't some little raid. This was a full-blown invasion. And they did it with a massive army for the time. 40,000 men. Think about that. They had momentum, they had the leadership, and they had the numbers. It looked like a sure thing. And after they took major cities like Niš and Sofia, this wave of, euphoria swept across Europe. The thinking was, this is it. This is the army that's finally going to push the Ottomans out of the continent for good. But behind all the victory parades and the celebrations, the reality on the ground was, very different. This seemingly unstoppable campaign was about to lead to a peace treaty, one that was built on a really, really dangerous lie. So imagine the scene. It's February 1444. The Crusader army is marching back into the Hungarian capital of Buda, and they are being greeted as conquering heroes. We're talking bells ringing, crowds cheering, the whole shebang. The official story? A total, unqualified victory. But here's the hard reality. While, they'd won some early battles, the campaign had actually ended in failure. They got defeated, trapped by an Ottoman army in the bitter winter snows, and were forced into a pretty humiliating retreat. That triumphant return? Pure propaganda. And this wasn't some misunderstanding, it was a calculated deception. There's this quote from a source at the time that says, the leadership gave instructions to spread word of the victories, but contradict anyone who mentioned the loss. So they were actively, deliberately silencing the truth. And here is the absolute kicker. The lie worked. The rest of the Christian world totally bought it, thinking the crusade was a massive success. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Sultan, Murad II, he was facing his own problems and, believing his enemy was way stronger than they were, desperately wanted peace. So it's this mutual misunderstanding that brings them to the negotiating table. And so, a treaty was signed. A solemn oath that should have guaranteed peace for a whole decade. But that very same lie, the one about their own strength, would convince the Crusaders to make a truly, truly fatal decision. So the agreement was called the Peace of Szeged. It was signed in the summer of 1444, and it set up a 10-year truce. On August 15th, King Władysław himself swore a holy oath on the Gospels to uphold it. The war was officially over. But Cardinal Cesarini, the Pope's man on the ground, was furious. He argued that an oath sworn to a non-Christian didn't count, that it was meaningless. He said God would want them to press their advantage. The very same advantage that they didn't actually have. And incredibly, the cardinal won the argument. He actually convinced the young king to break his sacred vow. Just days after the treaty was finalized, the army tore it up and marched right back into Ottoman lands. This single act of betrayal would have consequences that rippled out across the entire continent. Because this broken promise, it didn't just doom an army. It helped seal the fate of one of the greatest cities the world has ever known. An enraged Sultan Murad, who had actually retired after the treaty was signed, was called back to lead the army. He met the smaller, way too overconfident crusader force at Varna, and, as we saw right at the beginning, he utterly crushed them. So, why does this one battle matter so much? Well, just look at the domino effect it created. The failure at Varna in 44 leads to another crushing defeat 4 years later, and that defeat clears the path for the Ottomans' ultimate prize, the legendary city of Constantinople in 1453. The disaster at Varna was so total, so humiliating, that it just shattered Europe's will to fight in that part of the world. So when Constantinople was besieged just 9 years later and it was pleading for help, the memory of Varna was just too strong. No new crusade was coming. The city was left to its fate. Which leaves you with a pretty wild final thought. When does modern history actually begin? With the Renaissance? With Columbus? Well, for the creators of the massive grand strategy game Europa Universalis 4, the answer is very specific. November 11th, 1444. The day after the Battle of Varna. The day a broken promise helped redraw the map of the world forever.